Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dig in? Today we're diving deep into the world of Indian agriculture.
But this is no ordinary farm tour.
Not even close. We're talking about its inseparable link to livestock,
It's a system so intertwined, so ancient, so vital.
that it's got implications for all of us no matter where we live,
Yeah.
and to untangle it all.
We've got excerpts from academic studies, the latest research.
Even some pretty hardcore data tables, all to help us understand why this connection, crops and livestock in India, matters so much.
And what's striking right off the bat, this system's ingrained in India's very essence. It's not just about economics, it's about history, religion, a whole way of life woven in.
Okay, so we're talking symbiotic history then, right?
Yeah.
India has a huge population, everyone knows that.
One of the biggest on the planet, absolutely.
But they've also got one of the biggest livestock populations too, right?
It's staggering when you stop to think about the numbers. And this isn't anything new either. For generations, it's been about mixed farming agriculture, animal husbandry existing side by side.
It's like India's original multitaskers or something.
Exactly. And the livestock, they're not just passive players in this, they're vital, providing crucial resources. You've got natural fertilizer with their manure,
It makes
you've got transport, moving goods, and people, even horsepower for plowing, which is pretty important with how energy's going globally, wouldn't you say?
It's like they're the Swiss Army knife of the farm. Is there anything these animals can't do?
Well, predicting the monsoon seasons might be beyond them, unfortunately, but you hit on something crucial there, that livestock act as the safety net, especially on subsistence farms. When those crops fail, which sadly is a reality in many parts of India, livestock, they're the lifeline.
Like a four-legged insurance policy almost.
Exactly. They can be sold if income is desperately needed. Their products, milk being the big one, that's vital for these families. A buffer against complete disaster, which, when livelihoods are so tied to the land, you can't overstate how important that is.
And speaking of security, we can't talk agriculture without food security coming up.
Yeah.
And one thing popping up in all these sources is how much the demand for organic farming is growing worldwide.
And that's where India's traditional practices, they're almost ahead of the curve. It's like they've been unknowingly organic for centuries. And livestock, they're essential to this. Manure for fertilizer, their grazing actually helps the soil, even pest control. They play a part.
So it's not just what you're growing, it's this whole web of humans, animals, the environment itself. But you mentioned challenges earlier. With so many people, so many animals relying on this system, it's got to put a strain on things, right?
You're hitting the nail on the head. It's this balancing act, a constant one. We're talking huge chunk of the world's population and their livestock, all existing on, frankly, a limited amount of usable land. That's the paradox we've got to unpack.
It's like trying to fit a whole circus, elephants and all, into a one-car garage. How do you even start to manage that resource pressure, especially when it comes to feeding all those animals?
You're talking about fodder, right? The cornerstone of this whole system, you could say. And you're spot on. It's a massive piece of this puzzle. Our sources point to three main ways fodder is sourced in India. You've got your crop residues, cultivated fodder, and then there's common grazing lands.
Okay, break those down for me a bit. Crop residues, what are we talking about there? Is that like the veggie scraps of the farming world, leftover bits and bobs?
Kind of, yeah. It's the plant material left after you harvest the main crop, grains, mostly rice, wheat, even sugarcane, stalks, leaves, husks, those sorts of things. Might not be appetizing to us, but for livestock, it's got some nutritional value.
So using every part of the plant, smart. But is it really enough to keep such a massive livestock population going?
That's where it gets tricky. See, crop residues, they're better than nothing, but they're not exactly the nutritional powerhouse you'd want. And their availability, well, it's all down to the harvest season, isn't it? Feast or famine. That's where cultivated fodder comes in, land specifically used to grow feed crops just for the animals.
Right, makes sense, like a dedicated grocery store for the livestock.
Yeah.
But in the research, it said cultivated fodder, it only takes up about 5% of India's cropped land. Doesn't seem like a lot when you're talking millions upon millions of animals to feed.
And that 5% tells the story, doesn't it? The constant battle for land. Food for humans or food for the animals they rely on. It's a tough choice, especially as the population grows and that demand from both sides just keeps increasing.
It really highlights how linked it all is. You tweak one thing,
Yeah.
everything else feels it. So what happens when there simply isn't enough fodder to go around? What are the knock-on effects?
Well, livestock productivity takes a hit. Think about it. If you're not eating enough, you're not going to be functioning at your best, are you? Same goes for livestock. And one of the key examples they use in the research is milk yield.
Right, right. It mentioned how cows and buffaloes in India, they produce less milk on average than, say, their European counterparts, places like the U.S. Is that just down to this fodder shortage?
It's a huge factor. Not enough good food, their milk production drops, and then it becomes this vicious cycle.
Because then the farmers have to go out, spend even more on expensive feeds, just to make up for the lack of fodder, which eats into their profits.
Precisely. In some cases, feed can be a whopping 60–70% of the cost of milk production. That's a huge burden when farmers are already working with such tight margins, wouldn't you say?
So less fodder, less milk, higher costs.
Yeah.
It's like agricultural Jenga, pull out one block, the whole thing gets wobbly. But there's got to be solutions out there, things people are working on to address this.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really exciting. There's some serious innovation happening in India. One of the big things is the work being done by this group called ICAR, IGSRI. Big name, but it's basically the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, their Grassland and Fodder Research Institute. They're like the superhero scientists of the fodder world.
Superhero scientists, huh? Now I'm really listening. What kind of superpowers are we talking?
These guys are developing new types of fodder crops, ones that are high-yielding, nutrient-rich. Imagine crops that grow faster, produce more, even handle tough conditions like drought, poor soil, all those things that can make life hard for farmers. They've already got over 330 of these, like, super-powered fodder varieties developed.
That's amazing. It's like what? Giving farmers a way to grow more food for their animals, but using the same amount of land, same water, resources, but efficiency.
Exactly. And it's not just about quantity. These new varieties, they're often more nutritious too, which means healthier livestock, and you guessed it, better milk yields. Dairying becomes more profitable, benefits everyone along the line.
More milk, more money, happier cows, everybody wins.
Yeah.
But gotta ask, are there solutions beyond just like new and improved crops? What about using what's already there in a smarter way?
You're thinking ahead. I like it. That leads us to something called silvopasture. Sometimes it's called hortipasture, but same idea.
Okay, those are some words. Break it down for me.
Imagine your regular pasture, right? But it's not just grass. Picture trees, fruit trees even, dotted all around. Like you're building this layered ecosystem. Livestock graze below, but the trees, they provide shade, some extra fodder from their leaves, might even get some fruit in the bargain.
Hold on. So it's like a buffet for cows now. They get their grass, side of tree leaves, maybe dessert with some fresh fruit.
That's the idea. A more diverse system, more resilient too. But it's not just about happy cows either. Silvopasture, it's got huge implications for sustainability. The trees, they help stop soil erosion, water retention is better. They even suck up carbon from the atmosphere. Win-win for farmers, win-win for the planet.
Now that I like. Turning the whole farm into this eco-friendly, food-producing powerhouse. But I have a feeling these solutions, they're not one-size-fits-all, are they? India's so diverse, different regions got to have their own challenges.
You're absolutely right. Just like a recipe, the right ingredients matter. Solutions need to fit the local context. So let's do it. Let's switch gears, do a little regional deep dive here, see how these ideas actually play out in different parts of India.
Sounds good to me. Let's trade our magnifying glass for a map then and zoom in on some specific spots. All right, hiking boots laced up, virtual map in hand. Where are we dropping in first on this regional tour of ours?
Let's kick things off with a place that really highlights how tough fodder production can be, Rajasthan.
Rajasthan, yeah. Land of incredible forts, amazing culture. But if I'm remembering our data right, they've got a serious fodder shortage going on, don't they? Something like a 32.7% deficit, if memory serves.
That's the one. And those numbers, they translate to real struggles for both the people and the livestock there.
So what makes Rajasthan such a tough place to grow fodder? Is it just the whole desert climate thing?
That's a big part of it, definitely. Rajasthan's a lot of arid and semi-arid land, which means rainfall's limited, and that directly impacts how much natural grazing land you've got. Imagine trying to keep a lush garden going in the middle of the desert. It's an uphill battle.
Makes sense. Water is everything for plants. Yeah. But it's not just the lack of natural grazing land, is it? What else feeds into this deficit?
Well, because of that water scarcity, farmers in Rajasthan, they rely heavily on crop residues. Wheat straw, mustard straw, that's their main fodder source. But even with that, it's just not enough to meet the needs, which is why we see that huge deficit we talked about.
Right, and it's not just about how much fodder, it's the quality too, right?
Exactly. Remember we said how crop residues are not exactly the most nutrient-packed things? Well, in Rajasthan, that's a big issue. Leaning so hard on things like wheat straw, it can lead to livestock with nutritional deficiencies, impacts their health, how productive they are, all of that.
There's that interconnectedness again. Environment throws a curveball, impacts fodder, which then impacts the animals, and ultimately the farmers relying on them. It's a chain reaction.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it really drives home why those new fodder varieties we discussed, the ones ICAR, IGFRI, are developing, they're so crucial, especially in places like Rajasthan. Imagine if farmers had the tools to grow more fodder, better quality too, even with limited water. That's a game changer, wouldn't you say?
Like giving them a secret weapon in the fight against those environmental challenges. Okay, so we've seen the struggle, the deficit side of things. Where are people seemingly winning the fodder game?
Let's jump over to Punjab, a place that's almost the opposite of Rajasthan in a lot of ways.
Punjab,
Yeah.
the breadbasket of India, right? Heard so much about how amazing their agriculture is. They're the fodder champs too, then.
They're definitely a success story, that's for sure. Punjab's got those favorable climate conditions, more rain, translates to more fertile land, way more options when it comes to fodder production.
So they've got Mother Nature on their side right from the start. But it's more than just good weather, right?
Oh, absolutely. Punjab's got this long history of intensive agriculture. They've got it down to a science. Maximizing yields, that's their thing. And that goes for fodder crops, too. Plus, they've gotten smart about integrating fodder into their existing systems. Like, they'll often grow it after harvesting rice or wheat, making the most of that land, squeezing in an extra growing season.
It's like this perfectly choreographed agricultural dance.
Mm.
One crop finishes, boom, next one's ready to go. No wonder they've got fodder to spare.
Exactly. And that surplus, it's not just by chance. Punjab's also got this big commercial dairying sector. They're known for their dairy products, high quality, which means high demand for high quality fodder. That demand, it pushes investment, innovation, the whole 9 yards.
So it's a self-fulfilling cycle of success. High demand for dairy, they invest in fodder, animals are better fed, milk production goes up, even more demand, everybody wins.
Exactly. Punjab shows that while, yeah, environment plays a part, it's also about human ingenuity.
Yeah.
Smart planning, adapting solutions to what a specific region needs, those are crucial too.
So as we wrap up here, what's the takeaway for our listeners? We've gone from the deserts of Rajasthan to the fertile fields of Punjab. Two places facing similar challenges but finding completely different paths. What's the big picture here?
I think it shows just how important this all is. And it's bigger than just India, what's happening with their farms, their struggles, their successes. There are lessons here for all of us.
Because food security, that's global, right? Finding ways to produce food sustainably for us and the animals we rely on, that's a challenge we're all facing.
100%. And as that global population keeps growing, so does the demand for food. We can learn a lot from what India is going through. Their traditions, mixed farming being one, the innovations like those IGFRI projects, even just how different each region is in its approach. It's like a sneak peek into a future where sustainable agriculture isn't optional anymore. It's the only way.
Like we've been given backstage passes to the world's biggest sustainable agriculture experiment. Centuries-old knowledge meets cutting-edge science, all trying to find those solutions for the future.
And maybe the biggest lesson is there's no magic bullet. Every region, every community, they've got to find what works for them, their specific situation. It's about adapting, innovating, always learning more about how connected we are, humans, animals, the environment, the whole package.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, next time you sit down for a meal, take a second. Think about the incredible web of agriculture and livestock that made it all possible. And remember, India's story, this is just one chapter. It's still being written every single day. It's got its share of challenges, that's for sure. But there's also this incredible resilience, ingenuity, this hope for a future where we can do things better.